Hi, welcome to the DRH show. As usual, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and wellness. Today, I'm joined by a cognitive psychologist and an associate tutor from the University of Essex, Dr. Petra Marcotti. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Dennis. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you here, Dr. Marcotti, and I'm really looking forward to having this interview with you. So if you could just share to us your backstory, your trajectory in life, and what was your journey like being a cognitive psychologist?
Okay, so I've recently finished a PhD in experimental psychology and cognitive psychology. So I finished last year. And as you said, I am an associate tutor at the moment for the University of Essex Online. Let's say that my educational background is quite varied, as in I started as an undergraduate in philosophy and cognitive science. And then I had a master's in psychology because initially I wanted to move into clinical psychology. And as I was doing this master's in psychology, I decided that I wanted to carry on with research. So I did a master's in cognitive neuroscience. And then I started a PhD in psychology at the University of Sussex. So this is how I got into research and how I this is my story, my educational background, as I said.
Now, a lot of people who will be watching this interview, Dr. Marcotti, they might be interested to follow your path. So if you could just give us a snapshot of your research project, give us a bit of flavor what exactly research in neuroscience involves.
Well, I guess this is a really broad question. I can definitely talk about my experience. So I worked on episodic memory, on memory for events. And in particular, I looked at visual perspective in memory. So the way we can remember our memories either from this own eyes perspective, so this sort of first person perspective, or we can remember our memories from an observer perspective, a more detached perspective where we see ourselves from the outside. And I had started this project during my master's, and then I continued with my supervisor, Peggy St. Jack, during my PhD. So we worked on this. And I think that you asked about research in cognitive psychology. I think one of the most fascinating things about research in cognitive psychology is the type of technologies that you can use to study so many different things. So in my case, I was studying memory. But what we wanted to study memory in the laboratory. So we came up with ways using technologies such as immersive 360-degree videos and virtual reality so that we could create memories in the laboratory and that we could have control on and that we could verify. So my research was mainly about memory accuracy. So to be able to study memory accuracy, you need to have control over what people are actually encoding with the memories.
Fascinating stuff. And another thing that I want to ask you, Dr. Marcotti, is that earlier you mentioned that you also did a bit of philosophy before you became a full-blown psychologist, so to speak. Now, not a lot of people understand that there's actually a link between philosophy and psychology. So if you could just share it to us.
Yes, you are absolutely right. And it is a shame that we don't see that much link in publications, for example. In cognitive psychology, it's usually difficult to see the link with philosophy. But I can tell you that for my topic, there is a very big link between philosophy and my topic. So I mentioned that I studied the visual perspective of memories. And we have one philosopher that I don't know how many of you will know. His name is Sartre, and he was a French philosopher. And he said that we only become someone when we are in the presence of someone else, of the other, as he called them. And visual perspective, this observer visual perspective, it is about becoming someone in your memory, so becoming the person you are in your memory in a way, just because you yourself are seeing yourself in the memory. So you are somehow becoming the other of yourself. Philosophy likes this kind of complex terminology.
Yeah, but I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate those terminologies if they're really into cognitive psychology. Now, I'd like us to step back a bit. We've been talking about cognitive psychology and the kind of research that you've carried out in this area. But what exactly is cognitive psychology? So how is it distinct from other fields of psychology? And also, if you could just share to us what's the application of cognitive psychology in respect to your what we're doing is studying about memory. So what's the point of studying memory?
Okay, well, I guess one of the most obvious answer is what is the point of studying memory? Because this is how we function. So everything we do in our everyday life, and some people might not agree with me, but everything we do, and everything that we are our memories. So if we don't have our memories, who are we? What is our sense of identity? Cognitive psychology in general is about, I guess that is fascinating in the sense that it is about understanding how we work as human beings. And this leads into cognitive neuroscience that tries to understand the brain mechanisms. But in cognitive psychology only, we try to understand the mechanisms at the behavioral level rather than at the neural level. So I think that this is fascinating because we are our cognition, we are our cognitive functions. And if we don't understand our cognitive functions, it will be difficult to treat any problems. And this is one of the reasons why cognitive psychology is out there, I guess. But it's also about understanding how we behave, how we are in the world. And here I'm going back a bit to philosophy. I can say that the practical application of my research has to do with the cognitive interview. So a more real-world applied setting is the cognitive interview. So some people might not be familiar with this, but the cognitive interview is one of the interrogation techniques used by the police for eyewitness testimony. And it comprises 4 or 5 different strategies that help people remember what happened during a witness event. But what we know is that our memories are not so reliable. So the more we remember something, the less we remember it, or the details that we know that we have about a particular memory are not always so reliable. So the cognitive interview has been designed to help eyewitnesses remember the event in as much detail as possible as it originally occurred. And one of the techniques used is a change perspective. So the eyewitness might be asked to take the perspective of someone else within the scene, within, for example, a crime scene. They might be asked to take the perspective of someone else. And that has been shown to sometimes help remember more details, or details that would not have been remembered otherwise. So changing visual perspective is in a way similar to this. So changing visual perspective, my research was trying to understand how changing visual perspective could help you or not help you remember some details about a particular event, personal event.
As we can hear from you, the thing about cognitive psychology and what really makes it fascinating is that it shows that behavior can be quantified. Because my area, we've got very different area. Your area is some cognitive psychology, whereas my area is positive psychology. And positive psychology often relies on theories and the philosophical aspect of human behavior. And as you've just talked about memory, it's something that we can measure. It's something that we can study in a laboratory. So I suppose that's one of the fascinating aspects about psychology and cognitive psychology in particular. Now you've alluded to about the applications of studying memory. You said eyewitness testimony. So I was just curious to hear from you. What other factors influence memory? Because I understand, even though sometimes we want to, recreate a situation or recreate an event that we've witnessed, sometimes it's not possible. So can you share to us some factors that influence memory retrieval?
Well, there are actually quite many factors that influence memory retrieval. For example, the type of information that you come across after you witness an event, after you've experienced an event, or it could be just internal factors. It's just a natural process of our memory system. So our memory system, our memory storage is not so big. So it can only hold a certain amount of information. And if that information is not retrieved, sometimes can be forgotten. Sometimes it can be distorted, but it has been suggested that this is an adaptive mechanism. So a mechanism either to help us remember more information that otherwise it wouldn't be possible, or as a simple strategy. So for example, the fact that we remember memories from an observer visual perspective has been linked to post-traumatic stress disorder. So it has been linked to the fact that people who have PTSD, they tend to remember their memory of the traumatic event from this observer detached visual perspective. And this is a cognitive strategy that we use, or that people that are affected by PTSD, that they use to detach themselves from the event that they experience. So to detach themselves from the emotions of the original event. In a sense, you are not embodied in your person, but you are outside, so you can take a more objective stand, if you want, on what happened. So I guess there are many factors that can influence our memories, our everyday life, our experiences, and as I said, or even thinking about false memories. If we think about false memories, why do we create false memories? Why do we have false memories? I think this is one of the most fascinating area of research within memory. False memories. Why do we have memories that are not an actual representation of what happened, and we actually add information that was never there in the first place? I think this is quite fascinating.
When you mentioned about false memory, it reminds me about deja vu, because sometimes we're not really sure if that happened, but we sometimes have that strong conviction that I know it happened. I know I've experienced this. So I think that's one of the intriguing aspects of memory. Another thing I want to ask you, Dr. Marcotti, is what is episodic memory? So for those of us who are not familiar about memory research, can you explain it to us, please?
Yes, absolutely. So episodic memory, as the name suggests, is memory for episodes. If you read memory research, you will probably find different names for episodic memory. So the distinction is a bit not unclear, but we tend to use different terms. In my case, for my research, I call it memory for events, because these are events that you've experienced in your past. Episodic memory could also be memory for single events. So for example, studies that use words lists, those words lists as the encoding material, as the material to be learned, they call those sometimes episodic memory. Then we have autobiographical memory. Autobiographical memory is memory for one's past, is the memory where we have a sense of self. It was us being there in that particular event. So I guess the episodic memory is memory for episodes, but I guess we should define what episodes are.
So I suppose by episode you mean like life events. Say for example, significant events like where were you during the 9/11 when you had the news about 9/11? Would that qualify as episodic memory?
It would qualify as episodic memory. There are actually quite a few. There are actually quite a few characteristics of episodic memories, of autobiographical memories, or memory for events. One thing about, for example, autobiographical memory is that it's a memory that is personal and relevant to your own life. And this is exactly what we try to do in our research. We try to create memories, although these were memories created in the laboratory, so the participants or people in general didn't really happen to experience the events. They were part of experiments, so in a way they were there because they had to do the experiment, so we can't really say that they were one's personal experience. But what we tried to do was to try and make those events personal and specific in time and place, so that they would resemble real world episodic memories in as much as possible.
Now, as a cognitive psychologist, I suspect that you've been asked this question a number of times, because I'm a self-confessed, disorganized, absent-minded person. So do you have any tips for people like myself on how we can improve our memory so that, we don't forget things that we're supposed to do or we're supposed to remember?
I guess, yes, I've been asked this question many times, especially when they ask me, oh, so what do you study? Memory. Oh, I've got a really bad memory, really bad. Well, the thing is, one thing is, it's normal to have, it's just, as I said before, it's just our memory system. So it's just normal that we don't remember all information. Then there are all those brain trainings, and these have revealed very mixed findings. It's not 100% sure whether they work or they don't work to improve your memory. But I guess that the takeaway message is, unless you have a serious problem, of course, but otherwise, just think of that as natural. It's just a memory system that sometimes cannot hold that much information, and so it needs to be forgotten. But then the significance that we give to the memories or to the events that we experience, or to our experiences in more generally, I guess that also has an impact on how much we remember. And there's also a link between memory and attention. If we don't attend to a particular stimulus, then it will probably be quite difficult that we will remember. So I guess my suggestion in this case is pay attention to what is presented before you.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important that you not just pay attention, but do a lot of repetition. Because I was born in the 80s, and I grew up in Southeast Asia. So my education is pretty much, it involves a lot of rote learning, a lot of memorization. And what I do is I just repeat it all the time. And that allows me to remember all of those, things that you find in textbook. So I think that's important, repetition. And
repetition is important. If it comes to learning something, more than repetition, so if you are studying, for example, more than repetition, testing is very important. So testing yourself, or if you can get tests, quiz questions, for example, that can also be quite helpful. And I guess this is more helpful for teaching settings rather than I think it's important. It can be important or useful for individuals as well. Yeah.
And also another thing I want to ask you, since I have a memory expert here, a lot of drug companies claim that they can boost memory. Is there any scientific evidence to support those claims?
Well, I know of vitamins that can boost memory. I'm not a biologist or anything, so I don't want to claim, I don't want to give any false information. But I know that vitamins can boost or can help your memory. I wouldn't really recommend buying a drug that says that it boosts your memory, because I don't think that is the case. I don't think we are at that point in research yet to find a drug that can actually boost your memory, similar to what was the series called? I can't remember the name now, but yeah, there was a series and a movie as well of this guy taking this pill, and his cognitive functions would just heighten, and he was just like the best, like a superhero with his brain. So no, I wouldn't recommend falling for these things.
Mm-hmm. And as you've mentioned, Dr. Marcotti, there's a lot of research behind memory. So could you pick a particular piece of research or a particular piece of work within memory that really strikes a chord with you? What's your favorite piece of theory about memory?
So I think it's very difficult to give you. I mean, I've read quite a few studies in memory, and some of them are really fascinating. I think that one area of research that I find particularly fascinating, as I hinted to earlier, is false memories. So there is this study by Wade and colleagues where they implanted false memories to their participants. They showed them a hot air balloon ride to their participants, pictures of a hot air balloon ride that never happened. And what they found was that participants actually experienced or remembered being in the hot air balloon ride when in fact they never were. So this shows how vulnerable, in a way, how fragile our memory system can be.
And can you also talk about, because you alluded to earlier that a lot of our thinking process is influenced by a memory. So can you talk about how our past experiences, our past thoughts, and future goals, how these affect our current thinking process?
Well, memory is linked to thinking, is linked to episodic future thinking, so thinking about the future. But if you stop for a second and you start to think, what is it that you are doing in your brain? You are retrieving memories. So there are different theories of how, not really thinking, but about imagination, imagining something. There, as I said, there are different theories. But one theory is that we put together pieces of information that we recollect from our past, something that we've experienced, and we create a sort of new image within our mind of imagination. So we create this new image. So when I started researching into memory, I thought, well, but memory is thinking, because what I'm thinking right now has to be linked with memory somehow. It has to be, if you put the pieces together, all the thoughts that you create in your mind, they need to come from somewhere, and they probably come from your memory system.
And of course, talking about memory, another interrelated topic is consciousness. So what exactly is consciousness, and are there any underlying brain mechanisms that is related to consciousness?
So memory and consciousness are they are linked. As I said at the beginning, memory is what allows you to have a sense of identity. The question is, what is consciousness? I guess that we don't know yet what consciousness is. There are many different theories into consciousness, but we don't really know what consciousness is. And I guess that one way in which we can look at consciousness is through memory. So this idea of this first person or embodied perspective and this third person and out of body perspective, or the out of body perspective has been linked to out of body experiences, and out of body experiences have been linked to consciousness, so to different ways in which our consciousness, if you want, work. So I guess that these are all interlinked, and it all comes down to the fact that, in my opinion, it all comes down to the fact that memory is what makes, what gives our identity as a person, what gives our identity as a self. And consciousness is exactly the same thing. I can't talk too much about brain studies into consciousness because this hasn't been, I've been mainly focusing on behavioral studies, so I wouldn't want to give
absolutely
this sense, but this is my idea. Yeah.
And I think a good example of when you said that memory is the foundation of our personality is that, you know, people who've got dementia, they can't remember the earlier experiences, and it seems that you've already stolen their identity. They don't know who they are, and they can't appreciate, you know, simple things in life. And I think that really emphasizes how important memory is. Now we've been talking a lot about serious stuff, about your research in cognitive psychology, memory and consciousness. So I just want to, you know, be more light with our conversation. Another thing I want to talk to you about is science communication, because I understand you've been doing excellent work, you know, sharing the beauty of psychology, the beauty of memory research. So for you as a psychologist, why is it important for the academic community to reach out to a wider audience, not just for prospective psychology students, but for the general public?
Well, because I guess it's, first of all, because we need to, so you asked me earlier about the application of cognitive psychology, and sometimes I'm not implying that this goes for all areas of cognitive psychology, but sometimes what we tend to do in academia, because what we want is a publication, is we try to get really deep into a specific aspect of our experiment, that we tend to forget that we also need to find the application in the real world. And a consequence of this is that not many people know about the research in cognitive psychology in general. So I think that research should not be just within the publication industry, within the particular journal, within the particular university you're working at, or the conferences. I think it should reach the wider audience, and it should reach even the public that doesn't really know much about research in cognitive psychology. So I think this is one reason, because cognitive psychology will be our step, and cognitive neuroscience will be our step forward in understanding how humans work. So I think this is one of the most important reasons why we should try and share psychology and reach wider audiences for research in cognitive psychology, other than being quite interesting, sometimes a bit too technical and difficult to understand, but it can be quite interesting. And I think this can give the motivation to researchers as well to try and make their studies, or try to answer research questions that can be applicable in the real world, rather than just being limited to the lab environment, if you wish.
Absolutely. So, because ultimately, some of the research are being funded by taxpayers' money. So it would be a bit of a disservice if you're not really communicating that piece of research that you spent the taxpayers' money on. So it's just a bit. I think it's just a bit polite for them to, you know, help them understand what's that piece of research that you came about.
Absolutely, great point.
Yeah, another thing is that you also teach psychology. So if I'm not mistaken, you teach at A levels, and you also teach at university level at the University of Essex online. So if you could just share to us what's the effective way to teach psychology, especially now that you're very limited with resources. There's very limited you know, physical interaction. So how do you make it more engaging to different levels of students?
Well, that is a good question. So I'm teaching research methods at the moment, both at A level and at university. And I think research methods is one of the most complicated and I guess the most difficult part of psychology, because it took me forever, for example, to understand research methods. Yeah. So in this moment, it is particularly difficult. So as you said, I'm teaching for the University of Essex online. So as the name suggests, it's all online. So the way I'm trying to do it is try to be try to make it interesting, but especially try to give a lot of practice. So things that students can practice, research scenarios, having workshops, tutorials. So make it somehow that they can do something firsthand. Whereas teaching at A level has been very rewarding. I've enjoyed it so much, and it has been challenging because these students had never heard of research methods before. So that was a bit of a struggle. And I guess the biggest struggle was the basis of research methods, the independent and dependent variable. That was very difficult. And the way I'm doing it, because obviously we are online now, is I try to make it as much interactive as possible. I try to get them to discuss, to practice as well. Ideally, I would have asked them to maybe run a little experiment, but now it's not possible. So it is two different types of teaching, absolutely. But I'm very, very happy that I can do both of them. So yeah, this has been a great experience.
Well, when you told me that research methods is one of the most challenging fields in psychology, I can vouch for that, because for my MSc, I did research methods in psychology, and I can confess that it's so difficult that I've actually had to resit a module in statistics because I'm not very good with numbers. So yeah,
it happened to me too. Don't worry.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you understand with research method is why you're actually doing a particular statistics, and yeah, it goes back to the basic you mentioned about independent variable. It reminds me of all those stuff, type 1 and type 2 error. Yeah. Now, another thing that I want to ask you, Dr. Marcotti, is for those who want to learn more about cognitive psychology, your particular field, is there a piece of research or a piece of work or a TED talk that you can share to us so we can learn more about cognitive psychology?
So cognitive psychology is such a broad field, really broad field. I guess that I don't even know everything that there is out there in cognitive psychology. I guess that there are definitely some nice TED Talks, and right now my memory is playing tricks on me, you see, that I can't remember. I can't really remember the names, but there are plenty of resources out there that can help you with cognitive psychology. But if I can recommend something for someone who doesn't know much about cognitive psychology and wants to know about memory, I'm sure you've heard of this before, but I recommend watching Inside Out, which is a cartoon. And I found that really, really, really accurate, but then very simple at the same time to understand. So if you want to know a bit more about memory, this is the first thing that comes to my mind. This is the first, piece of information that comes to my mind when you ask me what kind of resources. And then there are plenty of resources online. And one, if it's in academia, one can even look at journals. There are some very interesting research out there too.
And I guess there are also a lot of universities, they've got their own dedicated memory laboratory, memory centers where they publish a number of sources about memory. So for anyone who's watching and want to learn more about memory and cognitive psychology, just check out those resources. You mentioned about Inside Out. I've heard it a number of times, but I've actually haven't seen it. So maybe it's time for me to have a look at Inside Out. I wonder if it's available on Netflix though.
I'm not sure it is anymore, but I'm sure you can find it. There are other ways in which you can, maybe on Now TV or something else.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've been doing a lot of work. You're teaching, and you're also doing research, and you're also an advocate of science communication to the general public. So what's the big message? What's one thing that you want the public to know about your work and about your advocacy?
One thing that I want the public to know, well, I guess that this shows the passion that I have, I guess, for the subject, and the fact that I've been teaching and I've mainly focused my career on teaching is the result of the fact that I feel I've been in education for so long that it is now time to share what I've learned so far, and to share it the way I learned it rather than the way it is to be learned, if it makes sense. So one thing that I noticed during my teaching experience is that the best way to teach something, especially when it comes to some complex material such as research methods, that the best way to teach it, and if you struggled in the past to teach, to learn research methods, the best way to teach it is to teach it from the way you learned it. And the other message, I guess, is I failed statistics. I failed cognitive psychology during my undergraduate. I had to resit, and then I ended up with a PhD in psychology. So this means that with a bit of motivation, dedication, anything.
Yeah, and absolutely, statistics, that's something that you can really learn along the way. But I think it's important that you have, just like what you've said, dedication and motivation to explore more about your own research interests. And talking about research interests, you've done a lot of readings and research about memory. So I'm quite sure that you've encountered a number of misconceptions about memory. So if you could just kind of, identify some of those misconceptions and address them.
So one misconception is what we talked about earlier, the fact that, brain training programs, that they can help improve your memory, or that there are drugs that can improve your memory. I guess these are still some misconceptions, and unfortunately with media, with social networks right now, anything just comes out. And I guess that the other misconception is what I said earlier. The other misconception is to say, my memory is really bad. This is not correct to say. There are individual differences in memory. I, for example, have very low working memory. But when it comes to semantic memory, so memory for information, or episodic memory, I think it is a misconception to think of oneself with a bad memory. It's more like we can't really say that we have a bad memory. It's just the natural system, the natural mechanism of our memory system. That sometimes make us forget information. So nobody should ever be too strict with themselves or too mean to themselves, saying, "Oh, I have a really, really bad memory." That I don't believe that.
Well, would it be right for me to say this, that probably one of the reasons that we tend to forget about things is that there's a limit to a brain capacity, a memory capacity. So a brain naturally tends to discard those memory which are in quotation marks non-essential, so we could accommodate more information. Would that be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the point. That one possible reason is that some information is just forgotten because there is not enough space, enough storage, enough capacity for our brain, and it just can't hold that much information. So that information maybe is replaced with other information, and it's in that moment when that information is replaced with another information that perhaps false memories originate.
And I also want to ask you, so what do you think you would be doing if you didn't work as a lecturer?
That is a really good question. So I like research, and I want to explore different areas of research. I don't consider myself to be at the end of my career, but I only consider myself to be at the beginning of my career. And I've only looked at quantitative methods in psychology. One thing that I had in mind for a while was to try and look to do some research in qualitative methods. And the other thing is, I don't think I will ever leave research one way or the other. Research will always be part of me. Maybe the type of research that I will do is different. Since I'm teaching as well, I might even consider research within education. So to do some research that can help school settings or university settings improve the quality of education.
Interesting stuff. And how do you relax? What's your distressing outlet?
So right now, there's not much to do, unfortunately, given the current circumstances in England. But one way is to go out for a walk, because I do need some oxygen sometimes. And the other way is read. I read a lot of self-help and motivational books. And this is one way in which I can relax and I can focus on myself.
And finally, what else is in the pipeline? If people wanted to reach out to you, what platforms can we get in touch with you at?
So I have, you can find me on Facebook. Don't try Instagram because it's not really my thing. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. I guess that Facebook and LinkedIn are probably the two best places where you can find me. And maybe in the future in a blog.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome to write about your own research area on SiteReg. I'm sure, like what you've mentioned, you know, sometimes researchers tend to be very technical with the language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's one of the beauty of the blog, is that it tends to, you know, make it more approachable, you know, when you're trying to communicate your research. Anyways, Dr. Petra Marcotti, it's a pleasure having you here in the DRH show. I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thank you.